All right, guys, thanks for checking out another video. Today we got a really special one. We had Tara from Kitten Waits and Terald on the channel. Check out her YouTube channel, check out her website. She's a medium, psychic, and just a spiritual powerhouse and a really awesome person. So, real excited to have her on. I would say this conversation gets very deep, very intellectual, but I think it's one of the most interesting conversations I've heard. I know I'm part of the conversation, but nonetheless, listening to it back, I'm like, this is the real deal type stuff. This is two people essentially pushing their soul. This is two people going to their top level of spirituality and growth on earth and having a conversation from that standpoint. And I don't think you see that a lot on the internet. So I think this one is damn special. We talk about Ascension a lot, which in my opinion is the biggest human achievement you can have. I would say it is the human achievement to achieve in a way is to ascend. And we talk about what that is. And she had a reference to one of her friends who achieved it, and it's of the likes of Jesus Christ and many other people on that extreme amazing level to reach as a human. And so we talk about that, a few other topics too. But once again, we don't hold anything back on this one. This is where we both are, and we both kind of done some great things in life, and we're ready to rock and have a crazy conversation, and that's kind of what this became. So yeah, thanks for being here. Please like, subscribe, and follow. A lot more content coming. Really excited, just getting this channel really kicked off this year. All right, thanks guys. All right, everybody. Thanks for jumping on another episode of Joey Scott Media. I'm with Tara from Kittens, Waits, and Terrell. She, in my opinion, is one of the best mediums. I don't even know how you characterize yourself, Tara, but one of the best medium psychics, channelers, I think, on planet Earth. And so I've gotten to work with her a few times on my own channelings, and those have been absolutely incredible experiences. And to have her back on the show is just going to be amazing. So, hey, what's going on, Tara?
Hey, I'm so happy to be back. And I've been watching some of the recent videos you've put
Oh,
out and
yeah.
everything. And yeah, just
Yeah.
checking and seeing how you're doing. And it seems like things are I know really starting to um on people's channels, how you can see people are trying to get their footing, at the beginning, and then as things progress, it seems like they're really starting to get a nice foundation, and that's where I think like your channel's at. It's like I really start to see like a good foundation. You seem like really like I don't know, just like being in front of the camera is like whatevs, we're just in front of the camera now.
I
So
know.
it's nice. I think, yeah, I like your recent videos.
Yeah, I'm excited about it because like my whole goal was like I run this other channel called Beers by the Ivy, and that's my
Hmm.
sports podcast, and I've taken that pretty serious, like especially during the football season. But now
Hmm.
like my Joey Scott Media, I cannot wait to turn it on. I was essentially just making like content and kind of trying to get figuring it out, but now with
Yeah.
me moving to Chicago, like it's like the place of my dreams, and I'm gonna really hit the gas on like the exact content with my music and all that. So I cannot
Hmm.
wait for the history of this channel.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
I'm so excited for
Well,
you.
I'm excited for you
Um,
because I saw you almost hit like 11,000 subscribers, which is nuts.
Yeah, that's so crazy because when I first started my YouTube channel in 2016,
Yeah.
um I I remember like the one person subscribed, and at the time that was like my boyfriend. And I
Yeah.
was like, yay, because I was like, subscribe. He was like downstairs, and then there was like five more people popped on, but it was friends and family.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then one day there was like one person I didn't know that was subscribed. It was like a stranger. I was like, oh, a stranger. Like I was so excited. And then I remember when I got 20, I thought, wow, I was like, we're doing pretty good. We got 20 subscribers. I was like, we can retire now.
It's
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 all good.
it's so hard. Like it's a hard game to get those original people. The more you have, then people just assume
Mhm.
you're good. But
Yeah.
to get the first like 100, I think may be the hardest.
Yeah, because people, I think for the most part, people kind of look to see if other people like you, and it's
Oh
kind of
yeah.
judged based on numbers. So if like somebody has like a million subscribers or something, people will be like, oh, that must be a good channel because
Right.
a million people like them. Whereas somebody who's just starting off, let's say they got 100, it's like, oh, people must not like them. I don't want to watch that
I
channel.
know.
I'm like, human behavior is so interesting.
I know it is. I know it is. All right, so keep coming across like different people coming up to me and asking me like deep, like spiritual questions that they don't really know are spiritual. And of course, like I'm kind of reading their field like I normally do,
Mhm.
and it often comes up to me. I'm like, should I tell this person about channeling? And
Mm.
and I have told a few people about your work specifically, and I'm like, just go to their website, read it, check out some videos, and sign up for it. And if you can talk to me about it. But how do you characterize channeling in this like, because I think it's the cheat code of life. Sorry to go on run on sentences, but it is literally to me the connection to yourself and cheat code to your life. And without it,
Mm.
it's almost like life is not as fun. But how do you characterize the ability to channel?
Um, I feel like everybody has the ability to channel, and we're all channeling in different ways. Some people
Mm,
channel through music or through art, or when they're retelling a story, that they heard somewhere. Sometimes you're channeling, you're tapping into the original person who told the story, or what you saw, and so people kind of channel inadvertently through that. For me, when I say I channel, since I'm consciously doing it, something very specific that I'm trying to do. At first, it actually kind of, I don't want to say happened by accident, but it was like I was, I was a tarot reader. I still am. I still like my tarot cards because they're pretty.
yeah,
I
they're
like looking
cool.
at the art. Um,
Yeah, getting a new
but
set every month and flipping through them.
yeah, exactly. So I was reading the cards, but I'm an intuitive reader. I
Mm,
always kind of have been. So even though I know the book meanings of the cards, I go with what my intuition tells me. And so when I start pulling the cards, I noticed that my intuition was going faster than I could pull a card. So it's like my intuition's like da 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 da, and I'm like, okay, wait, hold on, like, let me get a card out. And then I realized I really didn't technically need my cards anymore. They were just kind of a crutch to access my own intuition. I think that's what a lot of our divinatory tools are. They're just permission slips to access your intuition in different ways. And through tarot, I was able to access channeling, where I would try to get a intuitive message. Let's say about my grandmother. She's crossed over,
hmm hmm
many years ago. And instead of pulling cards about her, I'm saying, well, I'm just going to tap in and see what my grandmother has to say, because I am a medium. So I would do that, and I would listen. And that's kind of how it started, where there's an entity, it's talking, I'm listening, and if I have to relay it to somebody, it's like I'm the middleman. I'm trying to like, how do I explain to somebody else what this spirit just said, or
mm,
this entity or energy? And then it got to a point where I was trying to do that, but again, just like the tarot cards, my energy, or intuition started moving faster than I could relay the message. And
mm.
so it got to a point where, let's say, like my grandmother was like, hey, do you mind if I just sit inside and talk through you?
Yeah.
um, and so that's kind of, what happened, where all of a sudden I was relaying a message, and it wasn't recorded or anything. So this isn't like it's on YouTube or anything, but I was with James, and I was relaying what an entity was saying, and all of a sudden I started talking like the entity. So it just kind of like swapped in and started happening. So for me, I feel that channeling, there's different types. Mine I would consider direct channeling, where
Mm,
the energy is literally in my field, and I'm allowing it access. Just like when I was coming on the Zoom today, it was like allow access to your microphone or your
yeah.
video, and I was like, so that's what I do. My own soul, because my soul doesn't go anywhere, it stays in my own body. So that's what some people are like, well, how do you keep from like getting possessed? I'm like, well, I don't go anywhere. Like, I still have a soul. It's still inside of me. My ego is still there too,
hmm
still kind of paying attention, even though it's kind of asleep. And I just allow access, being like, you can access my throat to speak right now, or you can access through my heart. If I'm too creeped out by something, I just don't like its energy, I'm like, nah, I'll just talk for you. I don't feel like you talking through me. And so I always have full control over that. And usually, like if I'm doing a channeling session with somebody and it's timed, I'll have somebody else keeping the time for me, and they kind of like wake me up, but I don't need it necessarily. I can wake my own self up. So that was something people had asked me questions about before, was how do you like just channel forever until somebody wakes you up? And I said, no, I can pull myself out. You know, at a certain point, my ego is like, hey, where have we been? Are we still doing something right now? Like, should we wake up? Like, what has happened with the time? But yeah, so to me, that's how I describe my channeling is just I'm just allowing something else to use me as a vessel, but I dictate how it uses me as a vessel, and I can say yes or no. You know, I don't always have to allow them inside.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think it's magical work. I think it's the cheat code to life, and it proves that like life is good. Like I feel like so many people, I always like point back to like the conspiracy community, but so many
Mhm,
people focus so much on like the dark forces of life, and
mhm,
like, you know, like how does God or the realm or like the goodness win?
mhm.
You know, how like this is how. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like I always think too, it's like I always laugh because like you hear like free energy,
Mhm.
and like then you hear some story about some guy like falling off a cliff that like invented the free car or whatever.
Yeah.
Like those airwaves will always be here because of like things like the ability to channel. You know, and you
Mhm,
study people like in history with great inventions, or even my own music.
mhm.
Like I'm channeling my higher self and then converting it into my language right now. You know, that's
Exactly.
kind of what I do. So I think it's great. And I do tell some of my friends about it, and they're like they don't believe it, you know?
Mhm.
And I'm like, I always joke with them, I'm like, well, just literally put a number down and she'll tell you what the number is on a piece of paper. You know what I mean? I always joke with them, and I don't know if like if that would actually work. I mean, I actually know it would work, but I don't know if you like it's more of a gimmick. Um, but yeah, just such a cool opportunity, and your fearlessness towards it was something that I remember being like, that's an impressive spiritual achievement that you have in terms of your ability to not have fear.
Thank you.
You got to talk about that because your approach to it is that fear almost doesn't exist, like when you describe it. But what's your
Mhm.
approach with fear and the ability to push yourself spiritually?
Um, okay, so I will say that there used to be a fear.
Yeah.
Back when I was younger, probably all the way up until um I was in my mid to late 20s,
Okay.
actually. Because you know, when I was younger, I was always feeling things. Sometimes I might see some things, but I always felt things. I would have weird dreams. And so I was always in a fear state because I didn't have anybody explaining to me what is happening.
Mm.
I mean, I had my nana and my grandmother that kind of tried to help a little bit, but it really didn't give me a whole lot of answers. You know, like they would just say, um, they would assume that any energy you see is probably a negative energy. And I've noticed that, you know, about people. They feel like if I'm channeling something or if they're spirits, somehow they're all evil spirits and they're all evil entities. And I'm like, you know, there's a balance just like there is in this 3D plane. There's light and shadow. Well, there's light and shadow in the spiritual realm too. And just like, you know, I wouldn't surround myself with a bunch of negative people, then I don't try to surround myself with a bunch of negative energy either. So yeah, I used to have a fear of my own intuition really because
Mm.
I didn't know how to utilize it. I didn't know how to well, it never really turns off, but I can quiet it. So I didn't know like how to work with it. I didn't know anything. And usually I find that when we don't know about something, that's where fear creeps in. The less we know about something, the more our fear fills in the gaps for us. And so um, when I was in college, I was talking to one of my friends about, I said, do you see spirits and stuff like that? She's like, yeah, I do. It's, you know, no big deal. She says, if you want, she goes, I could take you down to one of the dorms. There's a nice Native American man that walks up and down the halls. And I was like, really? Like, you're not scared? And she was like, well, why would you be? They're just people without bodies. And I was like,
Wow.
oh. And I was like, well, that's true. And she says, and if you don't like that person, then don't hang out with that person. Just like if they had a body, just don't hang out with them. And I was like, oh, okay. And then a different friend was like, well, hey, you know, maybe let's try using tarot cards, you know, to access with these spirits. And that helped to um, start to quell some of my fears. So I wasn't as scared as I was as a kid. And then as I got into my late 20s, I hadn't used my tarot cards since college, but I decided to bust them back out again. And every time I try to bust it back out, I could feel all that intuition that I'd been suppressing come like blooming to the surface, and I could feel everything. And it made me kind of nervous, but I decided this is silly. I was like, why? I want to understand it, so I can't keep running from it if it's something that's a part of me. So I decided I don't care. I don't care how spooky I feel or how creepy. I'm gonna read these tarot cards and I'm gonna try to understand myself. So I tried to understand myself through the use of tarot, and then eventually I started meditating, and then that helped with eliminating a lot of fear because I learned a lot about me and about the world around me through meditation. And then yeah, it just became less and less. And the more I trusted my intuition, the less fear I had surrounding it. And so now anything that I do with my intuition, it's not scary to me anymore. I just know that it's just something that I don't understand yet, but I know I will understand. So that way I don't
Yeah.
let my fears creep in.
Yeah, I always think like once you remove fears, like that all doors open in life. And
Mm-hmm.
but I also like through my experiences of like my growth, I've noticed that like there's challenges and blockers like a stepping ladder. And as you
Mm-hmm.
evolve well, as you honestly like in a way remove your ego and step
Yeah.
into your light and step into your light again, step into your light again, that's when
Mm-hmm.
the doors and the realm kind of challenges you a little bit. I call it the realm. People call it Earth, whatever you want. But it
Yeah.
kind of challenges you sometimes. Like, are you ready to handle like the new level of truth, the new vibration?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the coolest and greatest things about this life is, you know, it's the expanding energy. It's not like the raising of energy, but it's like the
Mm-hmm.
widening. At least that's
Yeah.
how I view it.
Well, I feel like what you're saying about the realm, about this 3D earthly
Mhm.
plane that we're on. I feel
Yeah.
like the more we challenge ourselves physically, like take all the spirituality out of it, the more we're challenging ourselves, physically, like uh public speaking or driving a stick shift for the first time, anything that makes you nervous, being like, oh, I don't know if I want to do it. But the more you push yourself to do things that make you uncomfortable, the easier it is to do that on a spiritual level as well. So I've noticed that if there are people that are scared of the 3D environment, they're scared of the realm, then it seems to translate over. They're also very scared of their own intuition.
Mm.
But the more I see people like trying to understand this physical world, they're also more open to trying to understand a non-physical world. So I think there's a correlation there.
And you've talked about this a few times, I think, on your channel, but sometimes I meet people, and I've probably been this person, right? That like they refuse to like, or they have like a fear completely to level up in some way, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I always think of like churches in this regard, like
Mm-hmm.
I'll be sitting at a church and then I hear like something, and I'm like, how do I phrase this? Like someone could spend their whole life studying like the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
but like, and I'm just amazed that like they can't get to a point that like to realize like the ability to speak to the people within the Bible is possible. At least I think it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you prove it's possible. I mean, the
Yeah.
words, I mean, you can literally speak to the, Yeshua von Joseph,
Mm-hmm.
and learn from him almost directly. And why do you think there's like that limit where people don't evolve further?
I think it's, well, to go back, I feel like everybody on this, plane of existence on Earth, not on Earth, whatever, in
Yeah.
the 3D realm, um, everybody's having a particular life experience. Like
Okay.
certain people in this lifetime, their mission is actually not to level up,
Yeah,
and some
that's what
people,
you said. That's
yeah,
what
and
you
some
said.
people their mission is to, some people are meant to be asleep or only awaken to a particular level, and all of it is part of learning for the collective consciousness, which I see as like source. It's the all. We're all one, and so we're all living different aspects of that source so that it could learn triple time.
Hmm.
So your experience is helping, and your experience can't be the same as mine because I have a different mission, and so everything's connected in that regard. But I feel like, also when people, let's say, don't want to go to another level, to the point where they say, okay, I can read this in this holy book, and I can know these things, and that's the level that they're comfortable with. And then if somebody approaches them and says, hey, you could talk to any of the apostles, you could talk to Jesus if you wanted to. It might come from a belief system, or feeling inadequate, like that's not possible for me, that's not something I can do, so I'm not even going to attempt it. It could be it could be a mixture of a lot of things, maybe feeling that they're disrespecting everything they learned growing
Mm,
up, or
yeah.
maybe feeling like it's something scary because they don't understand it, so that they just say, no, I'm just not even gonna listen to it, or try to understand it. So there could be several reasons, but also their experience is helping the collective in some way as well. Even if we don't say they're leveling up, it's just they're just you know doing what they have to do in this lifetime.
It's so funny. Like that question I just asked you had ego and soul intertwined within it, and you were like
Yeah.
unpacking that in real time. Like
Exactly.
leveling up is a complete ego mindset, most likely, I would guess. And
Yeah.
then the appreciation for others and understanding the journey is the way you
Mhm.
unpacked it on the soul side.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty much, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so can you you got to talk a little bit about ego versus soul and how you personally navigate it and how you
Mhm.
appreciate both sides.
Okay. Yeah, actually somebody, I had done, it was a channeling I did for a client, and he wanted to know, he said, some people say soul and some people say higher self.
Yeah,
And
okay,
he was
yeah,
wondering if it was the same thing or if they were two different things. And I had always said, oh, I just use them interchangeably. I think they're the same thing. Until somebody said, well, what if the soul was actually the intermediary between ego and higher self, and the higher self was its complete essence, and then the ego was its complete essence? What if there's something in the middle?
yeah. Mm.
And my ego wanted to be like, oh no, because you know
There's no
that's
way.
not what I know.
I'm
Like, okay,
superhero.
yeah, okay, Master Sensei. Like,
Yeah.
um, so then, I checked my ego at the door, and I was like, wait, hold on, let me meditate on this, because, I don't know everything, obviously. So I went inwards, and actually I was shown that, there's these different facets of us, that yes, there is an ego, which kind of lives and dies with the body, but it is an energy. So it kind of, you could still tap into somebody's ego who's no longer alive, because the ego kind of sticks around, but it kind of sticks around in the 3D realm. That might be like what people say, like spirits that are stuck on Earth are, but I think it's just maybe a leftover ego, an image
Mm,
of themselves. Then I feel like there's this soul, which is a mixture of a little bit of a person's ego and a little bit of their higher self. And then I believe there's this higher self, and the higher self is the purest essence. It's source energy. It's the all. It's the one that it's omnipotent, omniscient. It knows everything. We just have to ask the right question. So
right.
I feel like that's all within us. And who knows, maybe there's more sections, but that's all I have,
That's
so
where we're
far in
at.
my
That's yeah,
mission.
that's our growth. That's our growth stage. Yeah, I always
Yeah.
think I made a video about this I think a while back, but like what is like the perfect human achievement? And I
Mhm.
always think like of Jesus when I think of that. But do you think it's possible for someone to have n to completely remove their ego on earth and live in a human body without ego? Like, is that
I
possible?
do believe that, because there was this girl named Mina who lived in India, and I actually did a channeling video with her. It was called telepathically connecting to Mina, and of course, I know a lot of people are like, "Who's Mina?" So maybe
The
not a lot of
legend
people
is who
watch that
Mina is.
video. But Mina, I was connecting to her. I was channeling, sort of channeling and telepathically connecting to her in
Yeah.
real time. So when it's daytime here, it was nighttime over there. And it was like, and I think she was consciously doing this, but at a certain point, she was down to, I used to like kind of check in and see like what percentage of my ego is still there, and I don't think it ever really goes away, but what I mean is what percentage is still in charge.
Gotcha.
And so for her, it got down to something like 5% of it was still in charge, which means she was starting to do these crazy things where she's like, she had an accident when she was younger where a pot of like boiling oil landed on
Mm,
her head. And so she went blind and she was disfigured on the side of her face. And when she got down to a particular percentage of ego that was in charge, she decided, you know what? I don't have to be blind if I don't want to be. And so she gave herself sight.
I love
And
that. I freaking
and
love
it
that.
and,
See,
and and it was interesting because she was amazed with everything. It was during the time of Diwali in
mm,
India,
yeah,
and she was seeing all these fireworks, and she hadn't seen fireworks before, and she was just like, "Wow!" And the colors of the fruits, from the vendors, and just the colors of flowers and people's saris that they're wearing, and it was just like, "Wow!" To the point where she actually went more into her ego because of it, because all of a sudden she felt like this, it was so beautiful and everything that I must possess it. I must have it, and I can't live without it now. Until she realized, well, I have been living without it basically my whole life, and she's like in her 20s. And she decided she was going to keep her sight, but not allow it to run her, I guess, to be that connection to the ego. And she was trying to look into all her other senses, and she was like, well, all of these can be manipulated, but the one thing that can't be manipulated is my soul, my
mm,
intuition. And she was saying, so all of it, as beautiful as it is, as beautiful as the music and the people's voices and the colors I see, it's all just an illusion. It's real, but at the same time it's an illusion. And so I felt like she kind of like was entering this kind of almost like godlike state where she had stopped eating for, it was a couple of months. She hadn't
yeah,
she hadn't eaten anything. She hadn't drank water. Technically, she should be dead. She was not dead.
right.
And she had this. She had decided, well, either I can stay here on Earth and just be like freaking superhuman, and live this out like the dream that it is, or I could just, ascend. And so she decided on ascension. So she's actually not here anymore on this plane of existence, but neither is her body. Her body's not here anymore either. And I think that harkens back to like when people are talking about like Jesus ascending, and his whole body, disappeared from the cave.
Right.
And I think people can do that if they want.
Yeah.
It's a choice. Like I can either die and ascend that way, and there's a body that needs to be buried, or the whole body just disappears because you can do that. Like anything was possible.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's a story of possibility. And like
Mm-hmm.
some of those Jesus stories that are in the Bible, like they actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people lose sight on it because it was so long ago that it couldn't happen today. And it's the
Mm-hmm.
same energy system in a way. I'm sure that certain souls have made it even better.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully not worse, but hopefully better. But yeah, those are amazing stories.
Yeah, and I learned actually when I was tapping into Jesus and talking to Christ consciousness, he
Yeah,
was
he's the
like,
man.
there, yeah, he's like, there's a lot of people who have ascended. He says maybe not in the glorious way that I have, where there's like a
Yeah.
whole story that's attributed to it. He says, but there are people, and he says you'll never hear about them because that's not something this world wants to push. Like, they're not going to put that on the 6 o'clock news saying, hey, by the way, did you know that you could ascend?
Yeah.
Did you know that you could walk on water and freaking part the tides, if you wanted
Yeah.
to? Yeah, they're not going to put that out there. That puts way too much power into everybody's hands, or it reminds people of their own power. But
100%.
yeah, he's like, it happens a lot. He says, he goes, almost every year there's at least a couple of people that ascend. And he was like, and they're not going to be in a holy book. You're not going to hear about them on the news. And he says, and the only way you know about them is if you tap into their energy and find them.
Yeah, I always wonder though, like this is the ego in me, but I'm like what her like to her family, like did they just know she was gonna extend? Like you know what I mean? Like she just was like, you know what I mean? She's giving herself sight. Like, is there ever a moment where her family's just like who is my daughter? Like,
Oh,
Or am I
she
just too much of a realist? Like,
well, she was going through it with her family because She didn't have a great relationship with her family.
Okay.
Her father basically said that she was a what do you call it? Like
Negative
probably
word.
yeah, it was a negative word about
Okay.
her.
Yeah.
And saying that, she was never going to get married. She's a burden on the family because, she's so disfigured and
Yeah.
all of that. So she lived her life on the street. They didn't even allow her to live in the house. And so she lived off of people's good charity and, people would give her food and they would give her money, but she would give a lot of the food and the money directly to her family. Because she said, it doesn't matter if they don't like me. She says that shouldn't change who I am.
Mm.
And who I am is a giving person and I care about them as people and I love them. And yes, they are my family, but I also notice that they are me. So if I am spiteful of them, I am spiteful of myself. And
Mm.
so her family didn't treat her too well. She had other brothers and sisters. Um, and she did come home one day when she was like, I have my sight. And she says that didn't change anything. They didn't see it as a miracle or anything like that. They just said, well, go get a job then.
Like how many years was she on the street for? Like her whole life? Oh,
She says it was kind of between the ages of, I think, 10 and how old is she? She was like 24, I think, like 10 and 24. So about 14 years.
that's unbelievable.
Yeah, just sitting there. And she says, for the most part, I just sit and meditate. She goes, I just sit on the ground and I meditate. And some people sometimes drop off money in front of me or they give me like a bowl of food. And she says, and if I'm hungry, I'll eat it. If I'm not hungry, I just walk it over to my house and give it to my family. And I was like, wow.
Wow, that's a crazy. I always think like you kind of choose your life coming into this realm a little bit. Maybe
Mhm,
that's wrong, maybe it's right, but I like the standpoint no excuses and like you have the self
mhm,
power. I love that speech. But that is quite the life to choose. But her evolution is that's impressive, and I love the ability. I always thought that you didn't need to eat theoretically. You could figure out a way to
mhm.
vibrationally like switch in and out
Yeah.
of what you need nutrition wise.
Mhm.
And I kind of had to learn that when I was going through those health things with my stomach failing and my
Yeah.
thyroid, and you helped me with that on the channeling front. But essentially, I started with biochemistry just because I was like, let me learn about physicality. And then eventually I'll get
Mhm.
into like what I actually want to know is more my spirituality. Because I felt like I was
Oh,
getting so not physical sometimes. And I was like, oh, maybe this is a physical, maybe this is the lesson. But then I just got to a point where I could almost just like vibrate, like switch off and on, like my pain body versus my health body.
mhm.
And that was a thing where I was like, well, I don't need any supplements. Like I don't need like any of this stuff. It's just more of what vibration do I want to be at,
Mhm.
So that's inspiring to hear that someone like her at a master level was able to attain that. Do you think?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
It was I was always trying to like anytime I tap into her, I was like, so like where are you at now, Mina? Like what's going on? Um and she was telling me, she says, she goes, I don't feel like I need to eat a whole lot. So before she goes, I would eat like once a week, maybe, and then once every couple of weeks. And then at a certain point, she says when she had gotten sight, she wanted to eat everything because it looked so pretty. Like
Oh,
the oranges look pretty and the plums look pretty. And so she wants to eat those things. She says, but she was eating them and not feeling satiated. And she was like this is weird. So she keeps eating. And she says, and something else was happening. She goes, I wasn't using the restroom. And she says, I'm eating, I'm drinking water, and I'm not going to the bathroom anymore. And so she tapped into that. And it was because she had already gotten to a point where her soul was understanding that she didn't technically need that stuff. And so it didn't need to keep up the 3D appearances, like keeping up with the Joneses, where like, oh, I eat and then now I go use the restroom. They're like, that's
right.
kind of part like that's what we believe in this world. And she says, but it's all a program. And so her body's like, yeah, you don't need to use the restroom. And she was like, well, where is it going? And she was like, well, I guess I don't need to eat. And so she just gave up on the eating because it wasn't doing anything for her anyway. And then she tried drinking water. And at a certain point, she says, I know I'm putting the glass to my lips. I know I'm drinking it. She says, but I don't feel the water in my mouth. I don't feel it going down into my stomach, and I'm not going to the bathroom. And she's like, and she realized, okay, I don't need that either. And I was like,
Wow.
wow. So I'm not there yet, but that's inspiring. Thank you.
That's incredible. Yeah, I sometimes I think in my brain, like, I'm like, how far do you want to go? Like, in terms of
Mhm.
like the spiritual push? Because there's a certain point where I actually kind of like being like somewhat normal sometimes. You
Mhm.
know, like you know, and I do value some normal things, but like also pushing your soul and living the more of a spiritual experience, I also think is has
Mhm.
value, but I also think kind of being, you know, running around and having a good time being physical and is also good too.
Well, when I had, well, I've actually tried to connect to Jesus's energy quite a few times because he's a
He's the
cool
man.
dude. I just like talking to him.
I mean, he's
He's
like,
really
yeah,
nice.
of course,
Um,
yeah,
I
unbelievable.
mean, even though there's like, a whole religion like around him, he's actually really down to earth energy.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and he's like, because I said, do I have to be like Mina? Do I have to be, or like you? I said, where, I've got to go through, all these trials and tribulations. Do I need to start turning water into wine? Do I need to like stop eating altogether? And he's like, he says there is, if there's an infinite number of ways one could live their life, then there's an infinite number of ways you could ascend. And he says, and if ascension is your goal, you can ascend. He says, but there is no book that says you have to stop eating or you have to meditate 24/7. And he was like, he says, you do what fills up your soul and you feel is still a part of your life's mission. And so he's like, he says, if you want to still retain your physical body and have fun with it. And he says, because there's a lot of layers. He said, we come to Earth, and sure, people could say there's free will violations. Okay, we're working off a free will violation, or we're trying to understand it. But at the same time, he says it's a school, and we're here for learning. And also at the same time, it's a big old playground. And
Mm.
he says, I mean, he goes, these physical bodies, you're not going to experience that in any other realm like that. That's why people come here. He says it's because we get five senses to play with. He says we get different suits that we can wear, and we can look like this or we could look like that. And he's like, you can have fun. You can decide you're a skydiver 1 second and you're a firefighter the next minute. And he says you get to do whatever you want here. And at the same time, you're learning things. You're learning about free will violations. You're leveling up. You're doing all those things. He goes, so it's not always going to look the same.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with this topic because I love the idea of human achievement doesn't just have to be financial, doesn't just have to be anything physical, that there is
Mm-hmm.
a path of like spiritual development. And I don't, to your point you just made, like I don't know if one's more important than the other. You know, is running a 3 minute and 30-second mile like
Mm-hmm.
as cool as walking on water?
Yeah,
Like probably,
yeah.
like both are great. Both are like high level achievements in terms of the human experience.
I think that reminds me of something that my I was trying to tell my high school seniors back when I, was a teacher. And my seniors would always tell me, we're going to be successful someday. And I was like, but what does that even mean?
Yeah, I don't know.
I said, like, what is successful? And they said, oh, that's one kid said, being successful is having a huge house and five cars and you're making $1 million. Like that's being successful. And another student says, success is, me not living out on the street. Like if I could just do something where I'm supporting myself and not be homeless, they're like, that would be a success. And so I think the same could be said about our life experience here on earth, our what we deem, a a spiritual life or awakened life or I was successful in this life. It's all very subjective. It's based on us personally. And I feel if we create our own realities and then you know oh I could look to the other mirrors in my reality, but I could say that if all those people are me, I could be any one of those people, and I don't need to I don't know, I don't know, like outdo them in some way because it's like I'm just racing against myself,
Yeah, it's like
really.
you're like fighting the ego, or your ego's fighting outward. Maybe you are the ego.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's
I think it's just like what's inwards, like what's inside, like what do you genuinely want to do? What lights you up? And what do you find interest in? Maybe for some people it is spirituality. For some people it's you know, becoming the best at Wall Street or something like
Mm.
that. But that's part of their mission. It lights them up. And who's to say that one person is doing better than the other? Like what is better? What is that's also a subjective word, that person's better than that person. Like, but who are you to say that their life experience is it trumps that person's life experience?
Yeah, I have that same thought with like clothing, because like I was in Chicago and my there's this store called like 260 Pop-Up, and they essentially
Hmm.
have like designer clothes for like 70% off. So
Oh
you can
wow.
get like a nice, coat for like 100, but it retails for like 700, whatever the math is. But
Hmm.
like I'm sitting there and I'm like, I still don't understand the difference between the thing. Like it's a shirt and it's a shirt. You know what I mean? It's
Exactly.
like the same thing. Like I have like Duluth trading stuff that's like pretty well made. I'm like,
Hmm.
that shirt can go through a thorn bush and there's nothing happens to it. You know? And it's the
Yeah.
same thing with life. Like what's the difference? I think
Hmm.
one thing I've been drilling in my mind and over the last years, every job is as valuable as every other job.
Hmm.
There's no job that's like more valuable. Like if you have a person who doesn't clean the toilets in an office, that
Hmm.
job is as valuable as the CEO, as valuable as the new hire.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
I agree with that. Yeah.
it's just fundamental. I think in society we view everything on the scale of money, but as we know, money doesn't exactly buy happiness or isn't happiness.
I think some of that hierarchy comes from, well, I guess I'm gonna get real woo-woo here, but
Oh, this is what we do on this channel. I'm trying to make it that
you're
way.
like
Uh,
you're just now starting to get woo-woo.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I know. I try to throw in some cooler reviews and a few things here and there, but the bottom line is this channel is about,
Yeah.
fun conversations about spiritual development.
So I was thinking of like the negative polarity. Like you might think Anunnaki or reptilians, how they're all in a hierarchy
Right.
system.
Right.
And something that I find difficult, but it's just part of them being the negative polarity. Like that's just what they do. They feel like that's the way life ought to be. That I'm not as good as my superior officer. There's always going to be somebody above me, and I'm always going to be working under somebody. And it seems like a lot of that translates into this world too, where we kind of have this hierarchy system where we say that my next door neighbor is better than me because they have more cars than me or they make more money than me, so it makes them better. Like but it's just a person living their life experience, and that happens to be what joy they get out of their life is having cars and money. And whereas another person might say, that would be like hell on earth for me if I had to deal with all that money and all those cars and all that maintenance. And I just want to live a simple life in the woods and go talk to fairies and gnomes all day.
Yeah.
So it's like it's yeah, it's all subjective. It's all very subjective.
Yeah, I've heard different people talk about not being tied to the physicality of Earth, and sometimes
Mhm.
that's even finances. Like, why even own anything? And I actually even heard one person who was like very, very wealthy saying like,
Mhm.
I own no assets because I don't want any headache or worry or connection to the
Mhm.
physicality because that just grows responsibility of stress. And I
Mhm.
thought that was a rather interesting approach from someone who could have multiple Ferraris,
Yeah,
you know?
interesting.
And I wonder like where that lies. I think the back to Jesus, like I think the cool thing about him that I've seen channeled
Mhm.
was how I think relatively normal he was and like
Mhm.
great at connecting with people and being kind of like the big goofball,
Mhm.
which doesn't really get talked about, but it seems when people channel him, he does
Mhm.
come across as kind of a jokester and quite
Yeah.
kind of the goofball. And I think that I wish that was in the Bible. Maybe it is, maybe I just don't know, but that is quite um, a, a cool side to him that I think isn't talked about.
Well, it's something well, yeah, I agree with what you're saying because I get that from him too. He's kind of like a big kid,
Yeah,
but
he
he's
is.
he's
Yeah.
also freaking,
Yeah.
you know, also an ascended master. But he was saying like he says the thing with stories, and he goes, and yes, the Bible is a story, and there's a lot of truth in there. He says, but the thing is, he goes, when you do something that other people think they can't do, he goes, they start putting you on a pedestal and they start turning you into this like untouchable, just you're a one in a million, like nobody can do what you did. You're something special. And he says, and that's like the opposite of what I was trying to teach. He says, I
Yes.
was trying to say, like, you can do what I do. Here, let me show you some cool things. Do you dig it? Let me show you how to do that. He says, and that kind of got lost in translation where it
Right.
was, no, he's the only guy that can do it. He says, but
I
that's not true.
Yes, and that's the number one thing when I'm sitting at some of these churches that bugs me to no end. And I
Mm,
just and I've known this my entire life. This is I didn't need like I've just known like his story is more about what we all can do, not
mm,
what a special person could do. Because
mm,
the vibration of leadership isn't about showing what I can do and you can't. It's about raising
mm,
others. And his
mm.
story was such a one, in my opinion, of leadership. And I think that's also something that I wish would be on the more mainstream.
Yeah, I think it gets reinforced in our culture,
Yeah, it
basically,
does.
even in movies, like you think the X-Men, or the Avengers or something, that those are special people. You can never be a hero. You can never tap into your unique psychic ability or your innate power. That's something that only happens to special people.
Right.
And so and even like with like musicians and stuff, it's like, you not everybody's going to be famous. That's only for special people. But it's like, but who's to say that just because that person's being played on the radio that they're the best? There are some people that you never heard of that person. They're really good,
Yeah.
and it's like, it's just who's telling the story, basically. And it just kind of like feeds into our inadequacy, feeling like, well, I can't be as great as that person. I can't do as that person. But yeah, like not just Jesus, but Buddha and all these different masters, even Mary Magdalene, who
Hmm.
she's like, I ascended too. Not many people know about
Oh,
that.
they
She was
completely,
like,
I mean, I have theories on who actually wrote the Bible,
mhm,
or who put it together and who like I think it was written and then they adjusted it.
mhm.
But no one even talks about how badass she was and who actually she is.
Yeah, she was like, I was like his, well, she says they weren't really like married, but they were together.
Yeah.
And she says, and so um it could have been, in order at the time that women were really not meant to be on an equal level with men. So it was like,
Right.
well, we can't say that Jesus and his like wife or girlfriend ascended together. We would have to say he did, and then let's turn her into something else,
I know,
you
and
know?
yeah, it's just a complete joke of like her story is way cooler than uh yeah, I'm sure you've channeled her.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I always thought like as a kid that like I was like there's no way this guy did all that without having like a spouse type person. Like it would be too much for like one man in a physical body to bear.
Mhm.
Like there has to be an emotional relief of like the energy of a woman required.
Mhm.
That was always my take. So then when I heard people like you channel him, that, story, I was like, okay, I think that makes sense. Like there's just, I know he's,
Yeah.
the phrase of, well, he's not Jesus. Well, what I mean, well, well, he kind of is, but it's still like, I
Yeah.
still think you're gonna need I would just think you would need someone, even if you were able to at all times talk to your higher self, at all times talk to your guardian
Mhm.
angels. Like if you had that channeling ability that was absolutely on steroids, I still
Mhm.
think human connection would be so important to do some of the things. Yeah.
He said that it was, this one wasn't on YouTube or anything, but just
Yeah.
when I channel him, and I was just connecting with him, and he was like, he says, it's like, um when people talk about me and they wrote about me, he goes, that's that like when I was peaking. Like I peaked. He goes, everybody like peaks, right? He says
Yeah.
like people peak in sports or they peak in their careers or whatever. He says
Yeah.
I was like at my peak and everybody's like, man, that guy's badass or whatever. But he's like, he says, nobody talks about how it took to get me there.
Right,
He says,
exactly.
because he goes, I was a normal kid. He says, I played practical jokes on people. I would get in trouble. He says I messed up a lot. And he says I had crushes on people, like just any normal young boys. Like
Yeah.
I had crushes on girls. He says I would, do stuff with my guy friends. And he says, he goes, I did have an awakening point where it
Yes.
was like I started questioning my reality. And he says, and a lot of people know the rest of that story because it's literally written down. But
Right. Yeah.
he's like, it just he goes, there was a whole lead up to that. And he says, and I think that's where people feel inadequate. They think that I was, you know, knew everything from the moment I was born, and I didn't. He says I had to grow into that. He says, and I think people only see like people at their best and they say, oh, I can't ever be like that person. He said, but you don't see that they're just a human being and they've messed up and they've had to go through trials and tribulations to get to the peak of their career or the peak of their sports career or, whatever it was. He says, and I was just at the peak of my spiritual career. And he says, but nobody really looks at what it took to get there. And he goes, and I wanted that to be said so that people can say, hey, he's a normal guy just like me.
Right.
I have pitfalls, I fail, and maybe I can do something like that too.
I agree. Like two things. First, yeah, when I heard that, it did ring true to me that like somebody like I never liked the idea that like he was given everything because I just never found that was part of this realm's calculation, at least in my life. I feel like there is a journey, and that
Mm-hmm.
journey elevates you to be able to handle the vibration. Like that's how
Mm-hmm.
we started this conversation with. So I like the idea, and I like the idea if you're out there and you're kind of being a dummy in your life that, well, one of the greatest people to ever, you know, one of some of the greatest human achievements, like said person was a little bit of an idiot in his teens.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Exactly.
I absolutely love that. I just lost my second point because I almost got emotional talking about that, but that is just yeah, I think that would be fundamentally great for people to know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it would be good for us maybe as humans to try to see people as a complete picture, like each other person, as something complete instead of just taking out a portion of it. Actually, it reminds me of Instagram.
Mm,
Some people, like my students, they used to compare their lives to people they saw on Instagram. And I said, listen, you're only seeing like 2% of that person's life. I
yeah.
said, it's when their hair looks all good and they're like, I'm gonna take this picture. So they don't look like that all the time. They're not sipping Mai Tais at the side of the beach all the time.
Yeah.
There's more that's going on in that person's life. And I think that if we try to have like more of a broader perspective, like not putting people on pedestals, and in order to do that, we would have to recognize that, we're all one, that person over there that's building a house, that person's me. That person over there that's driving the Corvette, that person's me. That person, that is homeless on the street, that person is also me. And I think, when we do that, then there is no like this person is above me, and I'm only going to look at that small section that my ego craves. My ego wants to see the success and to see that I can't be like that person. Like they're somehow, I don't know, more godly than me or more, I don't know, elevated than I
Yeah,
am.
it's such ego thinking.
Mm.
You know, or like in terms of like someone's like more powerful than me kind of thing. You know. Well, I mean, some people are more powerful in a way, right? But not on the sense of
Right.
like you're better than me, like as a on like a core foundationally soul higher self
And
standpoint.
they
You
could
know.
just be more tapped into their personal power, is all.
Yeah, tapped into more personal power. What do you think? I got to go back to this ascension with your friend and other people we've talked
Mhm.
about.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like this fires me up. This is like the conversation I've dreamed of having because this is like stuff I thought about since I was like 5 years old. But like in terms of ascension, like what does that mean? Does it mean that you get to go? You can go out of the like you call it like the cube, but out of like the
Mhm.
overall realm. The realm of
Yeah.
realms, like the system of dimensions, or what do you think that means?
For me, I feel ascension is the where I don't feel forced to come back if I don't want to. I don't feel forced to reincarnate if I don't want to.
Gotcha.
Where like let's say let's go into let's say my free will violation happened in the I don't know, ninth dimension or something. And
Hmm.
I decide, and I have found out that it actually is a choice. We're not like punished. It's like, oh, you committed a free will violation to jail with you off
Yeah.
into the 3D. But we get to decide how we want to understand that violation and how we can learn from it and rebalance the energies. And there is no punishment. There is no person like some judge up in the sky saying, "Oh, you committed a violation. You did that. You got to go to Earth. You got to, They said it's all free will. So if you decide like, "Ooh, I committed a free will violation. I violated this person's free will. I want to rebalance the energies. Maybe I'll hit up Earth." And I'll see if I can learn there. So nobody forced us to come here. Like we came here on our own. But once we're here, it's very difficult to leave here without getting caught in a reincarnation loop if we don't learn the lessons we told ourselves that we would learn. So there's no jail keeper saying you can't leave until you've learned this. We're literally keeping ourselves here until we learn. So it's like, oh, you know what? Let me reincarnate just one more time. I think I can get it this time. And then I'll leave. And that's the ascension process, I feel, where it's like,
Gotcha.
okay, I got it. I feel I can leave now. And I can leave if I want. I can leave whenever I want. But I have chosen to learn certain lessons. And then once I feel like I've done that and I got everything that I needed to get out of this 3D dimension, then I'm gonna head back to the ninth realm or whatever.
Yeah, I love that. I always had a theory that like if you did hit that level, then like you would essentially get to a point where you maybe get to make a decision for like the planet to benefit it. And it would be
Mhm.
like your this is completely made up. Like I've never heard another person say this. I've always had this thought though. Like if you were, then like you would essentially get to choose something for the betterment of like the planet or human existence, whether it's opening more channels for people to channel or whatever it is.
Mhm.
Uh, but I always thought like maybe if you got to that level, then, and that's why it's so easy to maybe channel some of these people because like they are like always here because of
Mhm.
something that they got to choose. And it's I think it's maybe wrapped up in the idea of like dying on the cross and like your sins are forgiven kind of thing. Like
Mhm.
what did he actually do when he ascended? Like that would be something I would probably personally ask him one day when if I channel him.
That would be cool, actually. Like, yeah, why,
Like what was your
because
actual mission like behind the scenes for the greater good of humanity? Like that would be
because I,
like
I I remember him saying he was like, I didn't have to let them do what they did.
yeah.
He
Oh,
says, I didn't.
I gotta pause you. Sorry. Like
Oh,
that's what like because I help people on like forgiveness and like that is forgiveness is when you get to a level of mastering forgiveness, you see everything that happens around you.
hmm
So you just decide like, should I let this person live an experience through me? And then it
hmm
becomes like this chess mode. But okay, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, well, yeah. Actually, yeah, it is like that because he was like, he says, if I was at a certain level where I basically had no ego, he says, they have no power over me because I realize they are me. So I also have no animosity towards the soldiers,
boom,
towards Pontius
boom.
Pilate and all
Yes.
them. He says I had no bad feelings about it. It was like they're living their life experience. I'm living my life experience. I know that it all kind of benefits the good and all of that. They're me, I'm them. He says so. In knowing that, he goes, that's where I find my personal power is that nobody else has power over me because they are me. So he says they didn't catch me and arrest me and then they're like, oh, we're going to put you up there, and it's like, oh wow, I can't get away. He says he goes, I could have gotten away if I wanted to. I could have disappeared. I could have flown away if I wanted to. But he says that's not what I was trying to show people. He goes, I was doing this for other people as much as I was doing it for myself, and my own spiritual growth. So he says I let them do it, and I let all of that occur because I knew, he says, it was going to help in the long run. He goes, all the future versions of me, all the people that might hear of this story. He says, I let it happen.
Yeah, I think I love that. Yeah. Yeah, I always focus on his story just because like I'm so familiar with it, but you
Mhm,
know, I'm gonna end up writing this giant book series and maybe I'll put in there like the Ascended Master section and it's
mhm,
just all the people you never heard of.
mhm.
You know what I mean? Like in the life lessons, like your friend, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Of course her story is getting told through you, which is amazing. But man, I don't know. This whole conversation is just it's enlightening, but it's also like exciting.
Mhm.
It's
And
the
what I think is amazing is we can, I believe we all have the ability to tap into all these different people and energies that have so much to teach us, and it's because we're all living our individual life experiences that we're not the same. It's like a great thing that we're not all the same, because now it's like, if I want to, I can go tap into an Arcturian and learn from them. If I want to go tap into uh Siddhartha Buddha, I can go tap into him, or I can tap into Mary Magdalene, or I can, um and they're leaving behind what they learned. That's the energy that we're tapping into, is like just,
gotcha.
you know, their knowledge.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's always one thing too. I always wonder like who are you tapping into, like and how pure is that soul? And usually like James usually asks you, I think, like
Mhm.
what exactly, how much ego or whatever,
Mhm.
and what that is. Because theoretically if you ascend, I to your point earlier, I think you could probably get out of the cube and go somewhere, but would they still be here?
Well, something I learned, like, if like with Mina,
Mhm.
she's ascended and her body is not here. But she says that's only your perception of this particular
Gotcha.
timeline. She
Gotcha.
was like,
Yes.
there's an infinite number of timelines. She goes, there's timelines where I never ascended, timelines where I was never blinded, timelines where I never figured out how to awaken. She goes, there's timelines where she says you never knew me. And she says timelines where you exist and timelines you don't exist. And she was like, so she goes, I'm very much like alive on earth and very much ascended at the same time.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, when you channel my soul, I remember because one of the questions I had, it was about like my soulmates and like all that kind of jazz. And you
Mhm.
mentioned, or I guess my soul mentioned to you, I don't know how we frame this, but something like that. It was like, well,
Uh-huh.
you've already been married in multiple different realities with kids,
Mhm.
and it was like at an age of in your 20s. And I was like,
Mhm.
interesting, and then I got this book. I don't know what it's called. I think it's called Transurfing. You ever heard that topic? It's called transurfing.
No.
It's essentially like changing your vibration or like your reduced lack, which is like manifesting terminology, to then
Uh-huh.
jump into a vibration to be able
Mhm.
to live in different like realities. So like
Oh,
for
okay.
instance,
Yeah, yeah.
like I'm sick, right? I had like stomach
Mhm.
failure and all these things were happening in my body. Well, that was like in that world. All
Mhm.
right, so transurf over to healthy body world. Now I'm
Yeah.
here. Okay, so let's transfer her over into Joey does have his wife
Mhm.
world. Like so that's kind of like I think that's a cool concept of the multiple lives living at the same time. It's confusing and it's hard to comprehend.
Yeah,
Um,
I just call it timeline jumping. But yeah,
Timeline
so yeah,
jumping.
yeah,
Okay, yeah.
yeah. So you just have a different term for it. But yeah, I totally get what you're saying. And actually, when I was trying to get my property here in Arizona, up in the mountains, um, I needed I needed a little bit more cash because I had to, do the whatever escrow and all that for, just all the so much money.
Yeah, I know. I
At
know.
the
I
beginning
know.
when you're trying to, like, get a property, even though technically it was cheap. But I was thinking, well, I just, it was so weird. I don't really know how to explain it, but in my head, I just knew that, I think I needed like 10 grand for something. I said, I
Hmm.
just knew that 10 grand was going to show up. I don't know how it was going to show up, but I knew that that the property wants me, I'm meant to be there. So essentially I'd be putting myself on a timeline where 10 grand is just there, instead of the
Right.
timeline where I'm like, man, where am I going to get this $10,000? And so it showed up in a multitude of ways. One day I woke up and I checked my bank account and there was $5,000 extra in there. I looked at all the charges, or I mean, like deposits and stuff, and the last deposit was from like a couple of months ago, and it definitely wasn't for $5,000. And I called up the bank. I didn't say that there was extra money in there because
Yeah.
I don't want the bank to be like, "Ooh, there's an error here. Let's take that off."
Yeah.
But I was just like, "Hey, is there any suspicious activity on my account?" They're like, "Nope." I was like, "Okay, great, thanks. That's all
Yeah.
I need to know." But yeah, it was like all of a sudden I was on a timeline where that money existed in my account,
Yes.
and then all of a sudden I started getting all these checks in the mail from the IRS that said, "Hey, 10 years ago, we took too much money from you. Here's $1,000." And it's like, here's 500, here was 800. And all of a sudden, by the end of the week, I had $10,000 that I needed for my property. And I was like, oh, cool. So I kind of see this like the timeline jumping, just kind of like, and it's sort of effortless. I think we think everything has to be so hard, like everything's got to
Yes.
be hard work, but it's
Yes.
actually pretty easy.
Yeah. Number one, love the story. Number two, I think that's my big flaw in my 20s was, and I learned this at an early age, was like everything has to be painful and hard to be successful.
Hmm.
And that I think that's something like I've had to gather where it's just like, no, it's right now, change the vibration, go enjoy.
I mean,
Abundance,
I
abundance,
learned that as
abundance.
I learned that as an athlete. It was like the no pain,
Same.
no
I did
gain.
too. You gotta lift weights, you gotta feel the pain, and then from
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so I think that was something where I'm in my journey, I'm like, let's learn about the world of abundance. Let's learn about the world of there's no lack, and let's figure out
Mhm.
what that can lead to.
Exactly.
You know, you
Yeah.
embrace. Go ahead, sorry. Yeah, you embrace
Oh, yeah,
life,
yeah, yeah.
and you embrace life, and wow, it becomes very connected.
Yeah. 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 That's something I've learned about living up here in the mountains is, I've just kind of I'm just letting it in, and if I feel like there's a blockage, like I'm having difficulty getting something, then it's like, oh, okay, well then we look into the blockage. We don't keep pushing harder and harder against a brick wall. That's what makes life hard. And maybe my mission is to live life the hard way, but I choose not to. So
Yeah,
it's like, let's go in and find the blockage. I find what the blockage is, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, the doors are opened up again.
I know, I know. I'm trying to live in the easy lane, but I actually find it to be also challenging on the spiritual side, so it excites me, you know.
Mhm.
But yeah, that'd be one good question for Jesus. Like, did you really have to have that hard of a life?
Yeah. Like,
He's like, my life
did
wasn't
it have
hard.
to
It was
be that
amazing.
way?
Yeah, it was amazing. I was gonna ask you too, how do you, because I recently had a situation where I felt like I was getting like so many tales and signs of like like some person in my life and like contact this person, and I was like, oh, I haven't talked to this person in years, but maybe I should reach out to this person.
Mhm.
Like, how do you go about like listening to like and it could have just been my ego. That's the tricky part. But
Mhm.
how do you go about like listening to what the realm is speaking, whether it's like numbers you keep seeing or,
Mhm.
people are bringing up things in conversation and you're picking up on? How,
Mhm.
how do you perceive some of this?
Um, well, it definitely always catches my attention.
Yeah.
And I think people would understand, what we're talking about. Like when something's just a little too synchronistic, it's just,
Yeah.
you know, it's like things are just like falling into place a little too, um, blatantly. Where actually I have a good example. I was watching, there's this TV show called The Rookie.
No, I haven't heard. I think someone told me about that like 2 weeks ago or something. Maybe, I think.
Oh, okay. So it's a good show, by the way. I
Okay.
think it's fun. But so in the show, there was somebody who their hand gets chopped off. And I was like, oh, okay. But then I decided I wanted to watch a movie afterwards. In the movie, somebody gets their hand chopped off.
Oh
And I
God.
was like, okay, well that's interesting. And then I go on Instagram and now I see something on Instagram where somebody tried to fake somebody out by showing like it looked like they removed their hand, like their hand got chopped off. And I was like, dude, in like the last 3 hours, I've seen like four representations of somebody's hand getting chopped off.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I'm listening. What does that even mean?
Yeah.
So that's when I know, like, it's trying to get my attention. So there's synchronicity like that. Sometimes I also will just see numbers, like,
Yeah.
above somebody's head, and then I'm like, okay, that means something. Let me maybe I can't look into it right now because I'm like driving, but it's like maybe
Right.
I'll look into it later. But yeah, I don't I try not to dismiss them, but my ego usually wants to. My ego will be like, oh, we don't have time to look into why there's a number 7 above this person's head, or we don't have time to look into why you keep seeing people's hands getting chopped off in literally every show you're watching. Like, but then I'm like, no, wait. I said I wouldn't be sending myself this message if it wasn't important.
Hmm.
And it usually is. I mean, it's not like a groundbreaking message, but it's something that I need to know that day. So that's what I do with all those, messages, but they definitely catch my attention.
So you evaluate them and sometimes you even take action depending on the scenario, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just I don't need to take any action. Like when I see the number 911, 911,
Hmm.
I see it everywhere.
Really? Okay.
It's my stalker number. It's been stalking me since 2018. Like
Gotcha.
I would every time I look at the clock, it's 911, or it's on somebody's t-shirt, or it's on somebody's license plate, or somebody's talking about I had to call 911, or um and it didn't make sense why I kept seeing that number. I kept trying to tap in. I kept trying to figure out what does it mean? And it kept saying that's the number of change and everything falling into place. And I kept saying, but
Wow. Would
and I
not
was
have
like,
guessed
but
that.
well, yeah, but it's just my personal number.
Oh,
If
okay.
somebody else sees 911, it probably means something else for them because it's a different
Gotcha.
code from their own soul. But for me, it meant like change and things are falling into place. And I literally didn't understand it until probably about a month ago. Like all of a sudden,
Crack the
911
code.
meant something to me. And I was like,
Crack the
that's
code.
what it means. I'm like, dude, but if me back in 2018, when I started seeing it in my classroom clock, if somebody were to come to me and say, hey, that's what this number means, it doesn't make any sense to me because everything had to happen, years later for me to actually understand it. Like there was a bunch of stuff that had to happen. Then I was like, oh, that's 9/11. Well, that's pretty sweet. So now I see it and I just smile because it's not
Hmm.
giving me any new
Yeah, there's no
information.
fear.
It's just like, hey.
Yeah. Well, you removed the
It's
fear
just,
and got the truth. I mean, that's how I kind of
yeah.
see that situation. Yeah, I call it this is kind of change the subjects a little bit, but I always say that you only have, in life you'll live so many days, but you only have so many memories. And memories are the moments of like some type of spiritual connection either to yourself or others, or maybe even
Mhm.
like the mountains. I don't know. But I think that is funny. We do, and then like you're saying, like there's certain moments in life where you're like, ooh, I'm like kind of connected. Like this is kind of
Yeah.
cool. And those are the moments where I like, if someone that gave me like why live kind of thing,
Hmm.
I think that would be probably be in my speech, you know?
That that'd be awesome.
Because it's just such a, and I wrote a song called Why Live, and this is
Mhm.
way back when, like this is probably when I was like 22, but I pretty much put that in there, and I was reading it again, and I was like, I was like, dude, that was good. Like I'm about that, like about that line. Um, awesome. All right, you got anything else for us? Any tidbits before we wrap up? Anything crazy? Anything you're going through? Anything
Well,
exciting
let's
in your life?
see. Actually on my YouTube channel, I started
Yes.
adding more light language activations for
Okay.
people. Because I mean I still have my channeling series, but I'm to give myself kind of a break of like trying to like put out a channeling video every Monday. I'm trying to do other things that like my intuition kind of wants me to check out. And I had been feeling for probably about 6 months, like doing light language activations.
Let's
But
go. I like it.
yeah, but I was like self-conscious. I was like, well, I would look really weird on camera, like talking in tongues, basically. And then I was like, well, come on. I was like, I thought that I was going to look really weird channeling, which I probably do, but that's neither here nor there. If it's helping people, then I don't care what I look like.
Well, I
So
gotta jump back in that because I would love to be able to speak like spiritual language. I think that would be pretty unique. Is that what kind of what it is?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's it's not really like words.
Yeah,
It's
it's sounds and
kind of what I
vibrations.
yeah, what I
Yeah,
learned from actually I there's a few people that come to channelings, have me channel for them that are musicians,
love it.
um, and so their music is probably the closest to the language of frequency, the language
Mm,
of energy,
yes, yes,
music,
yes, yes, yes.
and it kind of gets dumbed down kind of when we add language,
Hmm.
to things.
Yes.
So light language having no real, it's not real language, just mostly sounds and stuff. And actually, they started accessing my ability to sing. So I'm not really singing a particular song, but it's like it's just the vibration of my vocal cords trying to match the vibration that's coming through. And so to me, that's what light language is. It's trying to get across a particular message, but if we're just trying to decode the language, it sounds like gobbledygook, gobbledygook. It's just like, but people say they feel it, and that's what it's meant to be. It's less listening to some words, but more feeling it.
I love that. Well, Tara, thanks for coming on. This has been unbelievable.
Well, thank you for having me. I love chatting with you. It's
Yeah,
always a
this
lot
is
of
awesome. It's electric. We're getting into it. All right. Hey, well, thanks again.
thank you. Thank you.